My boss was blatantly stealing my ideas. After work, he would sit at my laptop and rewrite my concepts in his own words. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence, but after catching him in the act, I prepared a decoy folder for him. Now, let me explain everything in order. I didn't notice it the first time, or the second. Maybe I simply didn't want to. But the fourth morning it happened, I felt something inside me tighten, like a string pulled too far, vibrating with a warning I still couldn't name. The meeting room smelled faintly of old coffee and whiteboard markers, the usual 8 a.m. perfume of our department. I sat in my usual spot, half awake, still rewinding my memories of the night before. I had stayed up late, working on a set of concepts for the energy efficiency campaign, sketching diagrams, rewriting those messy lines of copy until they finally clicked. I had gone to bed at 2, exhausted but proud. For once, the idea felt mine, something I had shaped from nothing. Michael Turner walked in as he always did, with the confident stride of a man who believed the room existed solely to witness him. He wasn't intimidating in a physical sense. Average height, too sharp haircut, a tie that always looked pulled too tight. But he carried himself like an actor entering a spotlight, expecting applause for simply showing up. "Morning, team," he said with a smile that somehow never reached his eyes. "I've got something exciting today." I sipped my coffee, half listening, until he tapped the screen and brought up his slides. The title froze me before the content even loaded. Optimization Patterns for the Q3 Efficiency Rollout. My exact phrase. Word for word. At first I thought it was funny. Not ha-ha funny, more like strange funny, eerie funny, the kind that leaves a cold print between your shoulder blades. I waited for the differences, the twists. Maybe we just had similar trains of thought. That happened in creative work sometimes. But as he moved through the slides, my stomach turned. He was presenting my structure, my argument flow, my examples. I leaned back, letting my eyes narrow, letting myself pretend for a moment that this was normal. But the déjà vu was too perfect, too precise. I had written those lines at 1:30 in the morning while sitting cross-legged on my couch, eating cereal out of the box. There was no universe in which he had spontaneously produced the same thing. Still, I told myself it was just a coincidence. Ideas float in the air sometimes. People catch the same ones. But then he said, "And I thought of this comparison late last night, before clicking to the final slide. A metaphor involving heat flow and decision channels that I had crafted after staring at my radiator for 20 minutes. I inhaled sharply. No, that wasn't coincidence. That was theft. But how? I locked my computer every night. My desk was a mess of sticky notes and pens, but I kept my main projects in a password-protected folder. The only place those exact notes existed in full was in the notebook I carried in my bag. I had double-checked before leaving home. The bag was zipped, the notebook untouched. There was no way he could have... "Emily," he said suddenly, snapping me back. "Thoughts?" I looked up slowly. His expression was pleasant, but beneath it something glimmered. Expectation, maybe even challenge. He stared at me the way someone watches a door they've jammed shut, waiting to see if it rattles. "It's good," I managed. Neutral. Safe. My voice sounded normal, though my pulse wasn't. He nodded and continued the meeting as if he hadn't just peeled a piece of my mind off and pinned it to his chest like a medal. When the meeting ended, the team dispersed, chatting lightly about weekend plans and client feedback. No one noticed the frozen look on my face. No one saw that something important had just shifted inside me. Something small but sharp, like the first crack in a window that would eventually shatter. I walked back to my desk, my thoughts circling. Had I posted something somewhere without realizing? Had I emailed drafts and forgotten? Had we discussed this before? Each possibility formed, flickered, and dissolved. No. The idea had lived solely with me until this morning. I sat down and opened my notebook. Last night's ink stared back at me. The diagrams were identical. Even my sloppy side arrows, the ones I had drawn while yawning, had been copied into his slide layout. Not literally, with his polished design they looked cleaner, but the structure was unmistakable. I closed the notebook slowly. This wasn't only unsettling. This was invasive. But maybe, there was some explanation. Maybe we'd had a conversation I barely remembered. Maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe I was tired. Or maybe Michael had found a way to watch me. That thought was ridiculous, paranoid, borderline absurd. But it wouldn't leave. It clung to me as I worked through the rest of the day, replaying the moment he'd smiled at me. Had he known I would recognize the idea? Had he wanted me to? The sun was already low when I finally headed home, my mind buzzing the whole subway ride. The city blurred outside the window. Inside my head, the same sentence repeated itself over and over. This can't be a coincidence. And yet, part of me wished it were. Because if it wasn't, if someone was stealing my ideas before I ever shared them, then something far stranger was happening than I could begin to understand. For a while, I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. My mind kept circling back to that meeting, replaying Michael's voice, his phrasing, his confident gestures as he unveiled ideas he couldn't possibly have created alone. Yet every time I considered confronting him, a voice inside me whispered, "Don't." Not yet. Instead, I started paying attention. The first change I made was subtle. Every evening, before leaving the office, I took a slow, deliberate look around my desk. Nothing unusual. Pens where I left them. Sticky notes curled at the corners in the same lazy way. My mouse cable draped like a limp vine, exactly as I remembered. Nothing looked disturbed or shifted. My computer remained locked behind my password. Too ordinary, too untouched, too perfect. On the third day, I placed a hair-thin strip torn from a sticky note between my notebook pages, just enough that no one would notice it unless they opened the book. The next morning it was still there, unmoved. The notebook hadn't been touched. But my laptop? Something about the angle of the screen felt off. I always shut it closed all the way, pressing the lid down until it clicked. That morning it was lowered but not latched, barely a finger width open. A coincidence, maybe. A draft from the air conditioner, maybe. I told myself that, but my chest felt tight in that way truth often feels before we're ready to accept it. I decided to ask around gently. "Hey," I said to Nora at lunch, picking at my salad while pretending casual curiosity. "Does anyone ever stay late besides you and me?" She shook her head. "I leave by 8 most days." "Why?" "Just wondering who's usually around at night." She shrugged. "Well, sometimes the cleaning crew comes early if they're covering another building. Oh, and Michael. He's been here a lot lately. Says he's finishing reports." I felt my fork pause midair. "Reports?" "Yeah. He told HR he's swamped. You should have seen him last Tuesday, walking out past 10:30 like he'd been wrestling the entire system." She laughed a little, not noticing the cold weight settling in my stomach. 10:30. That was the night I'd stayed late revising my pitch notes and printing sample layouts. The night my concepts had mysteriously reappeared in Michael's presentation the next morning. "He's working hard," Nora added, oblivious. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Seems like it." That afternoon, I found myself looking at Michael differently, watching how he moved through the office, how he lingered near certain desks, how he always seemed to know just a little too much about everyone's projects. He had a talent for appearing casual, hands in pockets, shoulders relaxed, but underneath it I sensed calculation, like someone scanning a room for unguarded doors. When he walked past me, he gave a polite smile, the same smile he always used, except now I realized how empty it really was. 2 days later, I took the investigation further. I checked my computer's login timestamps. Everything lined up, nothing after I left. My machine hadn't been used. But then a thought struck me. What if he didn't log in? What if he opened my browser, browsed my files offline, took photos of my drafts? My heart pounded as I checked the browser history. All clean. Too clean. I always had random searches lingering from late-night research, obscure definitions, case studies, half-finished queries. But the history had been neatly pruned days ago. I hadn't cleared it. I never cleared it. That was the moment my suspicion began to crystallize into fear. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Maybe the system automatically cleared old entries. Maybe IT had run maintenance. But the timing was too sharp, too aligned with the morning he'd presented the idea I had finalized only hours earlier. I spent that evening pacing my apartment, running through worst-case scenarios. What if he had a key? What if he'd had IT give him admin privileges? He was our boss. Who would question him if he asked for access for management purposes? I barely slept. The next morning I arrived earlier than usual, determined to test something. I left a document open on my screen, a decoy draft, incomplete, filled with half-formed ideas. Then I minimized it but didn't close it, pretending to forget. I arranged my desk with intentional messiness, pens angled differently, papers slightly rotated. Then I took a photo with my phone before leaving. That evening, I pretended to leave but doubled back 15 minutes later just to check. Everything was pristine. My pens a little straighter, my papers too aligned. The decoy draft now closed. My computer, my locked computer, had been used. My breath caught. That cold electric chill washed over me again. The next day, in the break room, I overheard Tim telling someone that Michael had once borrowed his mouse because someone must have taken his by accident. It didn't sound suspicious on its own. But I began to wonder how many small, forgettable moments had been building toward this. How many things he'd done unnoticed because people assumed the best of him, or simply didn't care enough to look closer. That night, I stayed late myself. I waited until almost 9, listening as footsteps thinned, conversations faded, and lights gradually dimmed across the office. At 9:30, the place was nearly silent except for the hum of the vending machine. At 9:42, the elevator chimed. Michael stepped out. He hadn't seen me. I had tucked myself behind the corner near the copy room, holding my breath, pulse thrumming in my ears. He walked casually toward the cubicles, toward my cubicle, humming softly. A song I didn't recognize. I watched, barely daring to blink. He sat down at my desk. He didn't hesitate, didn't look around, didn't act like he was doing anything questionable. He simply pulled out his phone, unlocked it, and started flipping through my papers like he owned them. My jaw clenched. I hadn't been ready for the confirmation. Even though I'd expected it, seeing him, made something in me harden. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This was truth. And now that I knew, I couldn't ignore it. Something had to be done. But I wasn't ready for confrontation. Not yet. If he wanted to play games in the dark, then I'd learn to play better. I don't know what I expected to feel, stepping quietly toward my own desk like a ghost haunting her own life. Anger, maybe. Fear. Vindication. But what I actually felt was something colder, flatter, like the moment before a storm breaks, when all the electricity gathers in the air, but nothing has struck yet. Michael sat with his back to me, hunched slightly but focused, the glow of my monitor illuminating his face. I watched his silhouette outlined against the screen. My heart hammered so loud I was convinced he would hear it, turn, and catch me. But he didn't. He didn't even look up. His fingers moved across the pages I had left on my desk earlier, sliding them closer, flipping through them, photographing them one by one. He paused on a note I'd scribbled during lunch, a rough outline for a pitch I hadn't shown anyone. I watched him study it, nod to himself, then snap a photo like it was the most natural thing in the world. I think that was the moment something inside me cracked. He wasn't just borrowing ideas. He wasn't just cheating. He was trespassing, not on a place but on my mind, my creativity, the private spaces where thought becomes something real. Seeing him sit there, comfortable in his theft, felt almost obscene, like he was touching something intimate without permission. I stayed still, hidden in the soft darkness between cubicles, barely breathing. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A notification, harmless, probably some late-night grocery discount. But the sudden vibration made me flinch so violently, I nearly knocked a stack of magazines off the nearby shelf. I smothered the phone with my hand until it stopped, breath held tight in my throat. Michael didn't notice. He was too absorbed in his quiet little crime spree. He opened my drawer next. The smooth, careless ease of it made my skin crawl. That drawer held everything. Old drafts, failed sketches, notes I'd written only for myself. A few private comments about how irritated I'd been with him last month. Nothing dramatic, but still mine. Still personal. He rifled through it, lifting papers, scanning them, taking more photos. I saw his mouth tilt into a small, satisfied smirk. That smirk did something to me. It killed the last of my denial. I backed away slowly, keeping my steps silent, moving until I reached the safety of the hallway. Only when I was inside the elevator, doors closing between us, did I let myself breathe again. When I reached the lobby, my legs nearly collapsed beneath me. I sat on one of the benches by the window, staring out at the streetlights. People walked past in small clusters, laughing after late dinners, living normal lives untouched by the strange violation unraveling in mine. I went home, but sleep never came. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him again, at my desk, touching my things, peeling my ideas apart as if they were his by default, as if I were just a vessel supplying him. The next morning, I entered the office early, my pulse still unsteady. The cleaning crew was finishing up. The lights were still dim. And at my desk, everything was exactly where he had left it, not exactly where I had left it. I could see the difference now. My papers sat too neatly stacked. My mouse, usually angled slightly to the right, was centered. My pen, my favorite black pen I always clipped to the top of my notebook, was lying flat instead. Anyone else might have missed it. But once you know you've been invaded, even the smallest shift feels like a fingerprint left behind. Around noon, when the office buzz grew loud and normal, Michael strolled in with that same breezy confidence. He spotted me and waved with a kind friendliness that felt like an insult. "Morning, Emily," he said. "Got any drafts you're excited about?" My stomach clenched. He wasn't asking. He was fishing. "Not really," I replied lightly. "Just routine stuff." "Ah." He smiled, like he didn't believe me. "Keep at it. You're really turning into one of the most promising people here." The praise hit differently now. Before, I might have felt proud or motivated. Now it felt like he was admiring a fruit tree he'd been secretly harvesting at night. The rest of the workday crawled by. Every few minutes, I'd find my eyes drifting toward his office, watching him through the glass. He was relaxed, scrolling through something on his phone, probably organizing the photos he'd stolen from me. Every so often, he'd tap his screen and smile faintly. By the time evening settled again, my suspicion had fully transformed into certainty, and my certainty was turning into resolve. I hadn't planned to return to the office that night. I wanted nothing more than to go home, curl up, and pretend life was simple again. But some instinct, something raw and stubborn, sent me back after dinner. I stepped off the elevator at 8:40, heart pounding. The office was mostly dark except for a faint glow from Michael's office. His door was cracked open. I walked softly across the carpet, my footsteps swallowed by the silence. And then I heard it. The shutter click of a phone camera. I froze. He wasn't at my desk this time. He was at Sally's. Or maybe David's. It didn't matter. He was stealing again. The realization made my breath hitch. I edged closer, careful, silent. And there he was, half bent over another employee's work, scrolling, photographing, jotting something into his notes app. This wasn't just about me. This wasn't a one-time act or a mistake. This was a pattern, a habit, a method. Seeing that somehow made it worse, because now I knew exactly what Michael Turner really was. A fraud who thought himself untouchable. And maybe he was, unless someone stopped him. I backed away before he could notice me, slipping back into the elevator with a certainty that felt like a flame slowly catching. He wasn't only crossing boundaries, he was obliterating them. And if I didn't act soon, he'd keep going. Through my work, through my team, through anyone who didn't even realize they were being robbed. He'd chosen the wrong person to underestimate. The morning after I saw Michael digging through yet another coworker's work, something in me shifted. Fear didn't disappear, but it crystallized into something sharper, clearer. Strategy. If he wanted to steal ideas in the shadows, I'd give him shadows of my own making. I'd play the part he expected. The quiet, diligent employee who stayed late, produced brilliant concepts, and asked for nothing. The perfect victim. But inside, I was already designing my trap. I started by separating my work into two categories. The first was real. Polished thoughts, solid structures, carefully researched notes. Those lived only inside my personal notebook at home. And on a USB drive I kept clipped inside my wallet. No computer drafts, no stray printed copies, nothing left in the office. The second category was the decoy, shallow ideas dressed up just enough to look tempting, messy sketches, half-baked slogans, concepts that felt like they could be something but weren't. I made these intentionally flawed, good enough to lure him, bad enough that anyone who tried to present them would sink fast. I created a new folder on my computer titled Concepts in Progress. Inside, I placed a handful of files with official-looking names. The contents were deliberately inconsistent, some promising starts that went nowhere, others confusing and contradictory. Just enough to make a thief think he'd discovered something valuable. Then I left the folder visible. The first day, nothing happened. Michael barely looked at me, too absorbed in whatever he'd gathered from others the night before. The second day, I caught him glancing at my screen more than usual, watching the way I clicked through files. That was a good sign. He was paying attention. By the third day, I decided to add some bait. I printed a few pages from the decoy concepts and left them slightly fanned out on my desk, as if I had been reviewing them during lunch. I highlighted random lines and wrote little notes in the margins. Maybe refine, possible angle, and check feasibility later. My handwriting looked convincingly hurried. When evening came, I pretended to leave but circled back after 30 minutes. The office was quiet. The only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant elevator bell. And then I heard it, faint but unmistakable, the soft shuffle of paper. I peeked around the corner. Michael was standing at my desk, flipping through the decoy pages, frowning in concentration. He lifted his phone and took slow, methodical photos. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't nervous. He was comfortable, confident in the belief that no one would ever question him. Watching him steal from me again should have made me furious. But instead, I felt something unexpected. Control. For once, I knew exactly what he was taking and why. I knew he was sinking deeper into a hole he thought he could climb out of blindly. He left after a few minutes, satisfied with what he'd collected. I waited until the elevator doors closed before stepping out of the shadows. My papers were still warm from his hands. I smiled. A small, tight smile that I didn't recognize on my own face. The next morning, I made sure to act normal. I brought coffee. I chatted with Nora. I responded thoughtfully during the team meeting. I didn't even glance at Michael. I wanted him comfortable. Thieves, I'd learned, didn't like friction. They liked smooth surfaces and predictable paths. If I made myself predictable, he'd keep walking right into what I prepared for him. Later that afternoon, I overheard him laughing with one of the supervisors about late-night inspiration and getting ahead on next week's proposals. He sounded proud, almost smug, a man who believed he was climbing the ladder rung by rung, never realizing each rung was rotting from inside. By the end of the week, he was fully addicted to the bait. The decoy folder had new, modified timestamps, ones I didn't create. Someone had opened the files while I was away from my desk. My printed drafts had been rearranged slightly. My fake notes had new crease marks where he had folded them to photograph. He was taking everything I wanted him to take. But I still wasn't satisfied. I needed a bigger hook. Something he'd bite into without hesitation. Something that would publicly expose him, not just reveal the truth quietly behind closed doors. That's when the idea formed. A polished, beautifully presented concept that looked groundbreaking at first glance, but collapsed under even the softest scrutiny. Something he'd be thrilled to steal. Something he'd want to show off immediately. But I had to be careful. Too obvious, and he might hesitate. Too flawed, and he might pass it up. The idea needed to sit right in that dangerous space between brilliance and bullshit. For the next 3 nights, I crafted it. A flawless-looking fraud. Glossy diagrams with subtle contradictions. Statistics that referenced non-existent sources. A compelling narrative built on circular logic. It was art in its own way. Deception woven carefully enough to ensnare the arrogant. When it was done, I printed it, highlighted sections to make it look important, and left it on my desk as though I had forgotten it while rushing out for the weekend. Then I waited. Sunday night, I snuck back into the office. I needed to know if he'd taken the bait. My papers were gone, not misplaced, not shifted, gone. He'd taken them, photographed them, or both. And he'd done it confidently. Good. Because if he presented that idea in a meeting, he would crash and burn so hard there would be no recovering. As I stood in the dim office light, the empty space where my fake proposal had been felt like a promise, a countdown. Michael thought he was playing a quiet game in the dark, but he hadn't realized the rules had changed. Now he was playing mine. I spent the entire weekend waiting for my phone to vibrate with some kind of clue. An email from Michael asking to discuss ideas, a late-night message from a coworker saying he'd been in the office again, anything. But the silence was absolute, almost suspiciously so. And that silence made one thing certain. He had taken the bait. I knew it the moment I stepped into the office Monday morning. People moved normally, chatting, sipping coffee, preparing for the week. But Michael, he was different. He walked in with the swagger of someone carrying a secret trophy under his jacket, someone who couldn't wait for the moment to reveal it and bask in the applause. His smile was elastic, too bright, stretched a little too wide, as though his face couldn't quite contain it. He'd swallowed my fraudulent idea whole, convinced it was treasure. I sat at my desk, pretending to check emails while watching him through the reflection in my monitor. He kept glancing at me, but quickly, secretly, the way a child checks whether their stolen candy is still hidden in their pocket. He didn't want me to know, not yet. Not until he could parade his brilliant new concept in front of the entire team. The thought almost made me laugh. Instead, I forced my lips into a neutral line. The trap wasn't sprung yet. I needed patience. Around mid-morning, he summoned our team leads for a strategy alignment. His voice echoed across the office. "Let's gather in the conference room in 10. I've got something exciting to present." There it was. A subtle thrill rushed through me, not triumph yet, but anticipation. The trap was about to close. He had no idea. I walked slowly toward the meeting room, making sure not to arrive too quickly. I wanted to look genuinely surprised when the disaster unfolded, not eager, not prepared. Inside, the blinds were half drawn, leaving long stripes of sunlight across the table. Everyone looked alert, curious. Michael stood at the front, adjusting the projector with a sort of restless pride. His phone lay beside him on the table, my stolen work undoubtedly sitting in its photo album. "Good morning," he began, smoothing his tie. "I've been developing a new initiative for our upcoming quarter. Something innovative, something transformative." I took a seat near Nora, who whispered, "He looks way too excited. Think he finally slept this weekend?" "Maybe," I murmured. But I knew the truth. He'd been busy rehearsing how to present my fake masterpiece. The lights dimmed. The screen lit up. Synapse efficiency model. Preliminary proposal designed in clean, confident fonts. With graphics, I had intentionally made just sophisticated enough to impress at first glance. Michael launched into the presentation with the enthusiasm of a man unveiling a skyscraper. "I built this model after studying multiple performance strategies," he said. "This conceptual structure," he pointed to the first diagram, "allows us to—" He was repeating my words almost verbatim. I let myself sink back in my chair. I'd written every sentence with a specific intention: to dazzle first, confuse later, and ultimately collapse under its own contradictions. It was a time-delayed implosion disguised as genius. No one questioned the opening. Not yet. People nodded. A few scribbled notes. He spoke with such confidence that even utter nonsense sounded reasonable. But the cracks would come. They always did. By slide 5, the questions began. Tim raised a hand. "Where exactly did these statistics come from? The source is listed as Macroflow Annual Index? I've never heard of that." Michael cleared his throat. "It's a new research publication. Very cutting edge." A few people exchanged glances. Macroflow didn't exist. That was the point. Slide 7 introduced the tri-directional constraint loop, which, on the surface, looked technical, but a closer look revealed it contradicted its own logic. I knew because I'd built it that way. Nora frowned. Wait, isn't the third constraint supposed to feed back into the first? Not bypass it completely? Michael hesitated 1 second too long. Well, that's actually part of the model's flexibility. It breaks the entire loop, she said gently. Nothing can stabilize. More murmurs. Slide 9 introduced a cost-benefit ratio built from numbers that didn't add up. Sally tilted her head. Michael, could you walk us through how you calculated this? The baseline doesn't seem to match the projected output. Another pause. A longer one. He clicked back and forth between slides as if trying to find an explanation hiding somewhere. It's complex. The model isn't fully refined yet. Then why present it? Someone asked. The room grew still. Michael's confidence wavered like a candle flame in wind. He pushed onward, voice tight, but the damage was already spreading through the room. Confusion turned into doubt, doubt into suspicion. People scrutinized each slide now instead of accepting it, and the more they looked, the more the flaws revealed themselves. Finally, the director, who had joined the meeting halfway through, spoke. Michael, this proposal seems inconsistent. Can you clarify how you developed it? My pulse hammered. Here it was, the moment the trap closed. Michael opened his mouth. He couldn't say, I found it on Emily's desk. He couldn't say, I photographed her pages like a thief. So he improvised. I conceptualized it over the past few days, he lied, forcing bravado into his tone. I've been working intensely on it, late nights, personal time. Something inside me twisted, half fury, half satisfaction. He truly thought he could lie his way out of anything. But the director wasn't convinced. Then you should be able to explain these inconsistencies. If this is your creation, you must understand how it functions. Michael swallowed hard, throat bobbing. Of course. He couldn't answer. He didn't understand a single piece of it. People leaned back in their chairs, exchanging quiet looks. The silence stretched, suffocating and revealing all at once. Michael stammered something incoherent, then fell quiet. He was exposed. Not fully, not yet, but visibly cracked. The trap had sprung cleanly. I sat perfectly still, heart racing under my calm expression. He had taken my bait. And this was only the beginning. There are moments in life when time doesn't just slow. It stretches, thins, and becomes something else entirely. That was what happened when Michael's voice cracked in the middle of his presentation. For a second, it sounded almost like a glitch in reality, something breaking where it shouldn't. Then silence followed. A thick, uncomfortable silence that filled every corner of the conference room. Even the projector hummed more loudly than usual, as if it were embarrassed on his behalf. He clicked the slide again, then again, as if repetition might magically produce an explanation. It didn't. The director crossed his arms. Michael, could you clarify the underlying assumptions here? You're suggesting a 20% efficiency increase with no additional cost. That's highly improbable. Highly improbable was a polite phrase. The math was impossible, and every executive in the room knew it. Michael's jaw moved, but no words came out. He swallowed, eyes darting across the table as if searching for help, or oxygen, or some invisible script. I kept my expression neutral, if only because I couldn't trust myself to hide the thrill tightening in my rib cage. He had walked into the trap so willingly. The team began shifting in their seats. Tim tapped his pen. Nora frowned deeply. Sally quietly closed her notebook as if she no longer saw value in recording this debacle. "Let's move on," Michael said too quickly, his voice pitched higher than usual. "The model is still in development. I didn't want to overwhelm everyone with details." "Details are the foundation," the director replied calmly. "Without them, a model is just shapes and buzzwords." Shapes and buzzwords. I almost felt bad for him. Almost. He pressed on, clearly desperate to salvage control. "The tridirectional loop." "That loop doesn't make sense," Tim interrupted. "It contradicts itself. It doesn't stabilize any system. It destroys it." Michael blinked at him like he'd spoken an alien language. Nora chimed in. "Also, the statistics don't align with any known benchmark. If this proposal is as advanced as you claim, can you provide the sources? I'd love to read them." Sources. The non-existent macro flow index, the circular projections, the fabricated citations. I'd written them with the confidence of someone designing a beautifully wrapped bomb. Michael flinched. "I'll send them later." "Why not now?" the director asked. "You clearly have the information with you." His hand twitched toward his phone. I felt the air tighten. If he opened that camera roll, if he scrolled too far, he'd reveal everything. Every stolen photo, every late-night invasion. He must have realized it too, because he snatched his hand back as if the phone were burning him. "I'd prefer to gather them properly," he said stiffly. "This meeting wasn't intended to be a technical review." "That's exactly what meetings like this are for," the director countered. A low murmur spread through the room. Annoyance, suspicion, doubt. The shift was visible. People leaning away from him instead of toward him. Expressions tightening. It was working. Michael's confidence drained with each question he couldn't answer. The bold posture he carried into the room collapsed into something smaller, almost defensive. He started using filler words. Well, as I mentioned. But none of them bridged the gaps in his understanding. He didn't just stumble. He fell. Hard. Finally, the director closed his notebook with a soft thud, a sound more decisive than any shout. "Michael, I think we should pause this presentation. It's clear this proposal isn't ready for review. In fact, it seems like it wasn't developed with a full understanding of its own framework." That was the closest thing to a public reprimand I'd ever heard in this company. Michael's eyes widened, panic flickering beneath the surface. It just needs refinement. Some minor adjustments. The vision is sound." "Vision without substance isn't strategy," the director said. The meeting dissolved after that. People didn't rush out. They escaped, eager to avoid the awkward cloud hovering over Michael. Some whispered as they walked away. Others didn't bother hiding their annoyed expressions. I remained seated a moment longer, letting the experience settle over me. Watching the fallout felt surreal. A part of me thrilled in the justice of it. Another part felt strangely hollow. Seeing him fall was different than imagining it. When I finally stood, Michael approached me. His expression was a strange mix of shame, irritation, and something sharper. Suspicion. "Emily," he said quietly, "can I talk to you for a second?" My pulse jumped, but I forced my face into something neutral. "Sure." We stepped into the hallway. He looked around before speaking, as if the walls themselves might be listening. "You've been working on new concepts lately, haven't you?" he asked, voice low. "Something more advanced than usual." I raised an eyebrow. "Why?" He hesitated. "Your work influences the direction of the team. I need to know what you've been doing." Influences, a delicate word for I need more things to steal. I shrugged. Just exploring ideas. Nothing ready yet. His jaw tightened. He didn't believe me. Good. After a moment, he forced a smile. Let me know if you come up with anything promising. I always do, I said, and I'll present it myself when it's ready. For the first time since this started, he was the one who flinched. He left without another word. As I walked back to my desk, Nora grabbed my arm. Holy hell, she whispered. What was that meeting? It was like watching a slow-motion train wreck. Yeah, I said softly. Rough morning. Do you think he'll recover? I glanced toward Michael's office, where he sat rigidly at his desk, staring at nothing. No, I said in my mind. Aloud. Hard to say. But I knew the truth. This wasn't just a bad presentation. It was the beginning of the unraveling. The trap had sprung, and we were only halfway through the fallout. By the next morning, the office felt different. Not dramatically so. No one was shouting, no alarms were blaring, but there was a subtle charge in the air, a heaviness, a watchfulness. People moved like they were trying not to stir something fragile and dangerous. Michael arrived later than usual. Normally, he strolled in with confidence, greeting everyone like a benevolent king among grateful subjects. But today he slipped through the door quietly, shoulders tense, eyes darting as if he expected whispers to burst into flames behind him. I watched him from my desk, sipping coffee I could barely taste. The fallout was beginning. By 10 o'clock, the director summoned him to the glass-walled conference room for a follow-up discussion. The blinds weren't drawn. Everyone could see. Michael's face stiffened when he noticed the transparency of it, an unspoken message. This isn't private anymore. He stepped inside. The door clicked shut. People glanced over the tops of their monitors, pretending not to listen while absolutely listening. 5 minutes passed. 10. 15. Michael's expression shifted from defensive pride to tight discomfort to something like panic. His hands moved restlessly. He kept adjusting his tie, smoothing his hair, shifting his weight. The director spoke calmly, firmly, gesturing to printouts on the table, printouts that looked suspiciously like the flawed proposal slides. Whatever was being said, it wasn't going well. By the time the meeting ended, Michael walked out pale and rigid. He didn't look at anyone. He shut himself in his office with a sharp, metallic click of the door lock. The whispers began almost immediately. Nora slid into the chair beside me, eyes wide. Did you hear? They're doing a full internal review of his recent proposals. I forced my brows up in pretend surprise. All of them? Not just the proposals, she whispered. His processes, how he develops ideas, source verification, documentation trails. The exact things he didn't have. Tim leaned across from his desk. Apparently, the director found so many inconsistencies in that model yesterday that he started tracing earlier presentations. They're all weirdly shallow. And repetitive, Sally added, joining the small circle of hushed voices, like someone rephrasing another person's ideas. A spark of vindication flickered inside me, but I kept my outward expression neutral, curious, concerned, not triumphant. He's been off for a while, Nora said softly. Now that I think about it, remember that pitch he presented in April? I gave him rough notes, and his final version looked nothing like what he described he'd been working on, and he couldn't answer basic questions then either. Tim nodded. Same. Last month's restructuring idea? I'm pretty sure he didn't understand half of it. The puzzle pieces were moving. People began remembering things they had ignored. The late-night grinding sessions, the vague explanations, the polished presentations that fell apart under questioning. It wasn't just me he'd stolen from. He'd been siphoning from everyone. All of us had been feeding the black hole that was his ambition. Around noon, the director emerged from his office and walked straight to HR. A few people exchanged alarmed glances. HR visits never signaled calm waters. When he returned, he called Michael in again. This time, the blinds were drawn. An hour passed. A full hour. The office buzzed quietly but constantly, like a hive processing the scent of danger. Even typing sounded sharper. I tried to focus on my actual work, my real project, carefully hidden from Michael until now. But every few minutes, my gaze drifted toward the closed door. Finally, Michael emerged again. His face was a storm. Red, tight, furious, but covered by a thin shell of civility. He moved stiffly, walking like he wasn't sure where to put his anger without drawing more suspicion. His eyes flicked toward me once, sharp and almost accusing. I kept my expression calm, but heat pricked at my spine. He returned to his office and slammed the door, loud enough to startle the interns. After 10 minutes, the director emailed the entire department. Please ensure that all current project materials are documented clearly and maintained in shared repositories. We are reviewing project leadership structures in light of yesterday's meeting. It was diplomatic, almost sterile, but everyone knew what it meant. Michael's leadership was under scrutiny. By mid-afternoon, HR began calling team members in individually. Nora went first, then Sally, then Tim. Each returned with widened eyes and fresh gossip barely contained behind their lips. They asked if I'd ever noticed inconsistencies in Michael's understanding of his own proposals. Nora whispered to me, lowering her voice to a confession, and if I knew who actually contributed to them. And? I asked quietly. She hesitated. I told them the truth, that he always seemed to be inspired by work he saw lying around, not just yours, everyone's. Tim added, they asked me if I ever shared early drafts with him. I told them he used to ask for input but never gave any back. Piece by piece, his carefully crafted facade was being peeled away. By 5 o'clock, Michael still hadn't left his office. The lights burned behind his door, unmoving. I imagined him inside pacing, sweating, replaying the meeting and its aftermath. Maybe he was scrolling through the stolen photos, realizing too late that every image was a time-stamped trail of his wrongdoing. When I packed my bag to leave, a soft knock startled me. Michael stood at the edge of my cubicle. His expression was strained, brittle. "Emily," he said, voice low and tight. "Do you have a moment?" My heart thudded once, hard. "Yes," I said carefully. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a hiss. "Someone's been talking about my work, undermining me, feeding doubts." I kept my tone gentle, confused. "Michael, people are just noticing what happened in the meeting." "No." His jaw clenched. "Someone set me up." I met his eyes steadily. Why would anyone do that? He stared at me, searching my face for cracks, for guilt, for anything. But I gave him nothing. After a long, tense moment, he exhaled sharply and walked off, shoulders stiff with frustration. I watched him go, a man unraveling, a reputation collapsing, and the truth finally pushing its way into the light. By the time HR called me in, I already knew what they were going to ask. The signs were obvious. The glances from coworkers, the tension in Michael's posture whenever he passed my desk, the way the director's eyes lingered on me during the morning briefing. Still, when the message popped up on my screen, "Please come to the director's office at 2:15, my stomach twisted. I spent the next 10 minutes pretending to work while my pulse thudded heavily beneath my skin. When the clock struck 2:15, I took a slow breath, stood, and walked toward the director's office. The blinds were half open. He sat inside with a folder on the table and 2 cups of water set neatly between us, as if preparing for a difficult conversation. "Emily," he said, rising with a polite but serious expression. "Come in. Close the door, please." I did. The click felt louder than it should have. The director gestured to the chair opposite him. "Have a seat." HR was there too. Marissa, calm and unreadable, tapping notes into her tablet. Her presence alone confirmed this wasn't casual. "We appreciate your cooperation," she said gently. "We're reviewing several recent concerns about project authorship and presentation accuracy." Project authorship. I folded my hands in my lap. "I understand." The director leaned forward slightly. "We've been examining inconsistencies in Michael's past proposals, and during interviews, multiple employees mentioned something unusual. They said many of his presentations mirrored concepts they'd seen on your desk or heard you mention in passing." My heartbeat quickened, but my face stayed steady. "I see." He nodded, watching me carefully. "We'd like to know, have you contributed to any of Michael's projects without credit, or have you noticed any overlap between your drafts and his presentations?" The room felt strangely quiet, as if even the hum of the air conditioning were waiting for my answer. For a moment I hesitated, not because I didn't know what to say, but because this was the moment the truth finally had to step fully forward. All the nights I'd watched him steal, all the anger I'd held, all the quiet strategizing, it all led here. "Yes," I said softly. "I've noticed overlap. Significant overlap." Marissa's stylist paused. The director's expression didn't change much, but his eyes sharpened. I continued, choosing my words with meticulous care. "Several times over the past months, I've developed concepts that later appeared in team presentations. Concepts I hadn't shared with anyone. And when I saw that happening, I started keeping detailed notes. Timestamps, early drafts, version histories." "Do you have those documents?" the director asked. I reached into my bag and pulled out the neatly organized folder I had prepared 2 weeks ago, from the moment the trap began forming in my mind. "Yes," I said. "Everything is in here." He opened the folder. Inside were printed drafts labeled with creation dates, screenshots of file metadata, even photos of my notebook pages. Each concept was paired with the corresponding slides from Michael's meetings, evidence so clear it felt almost surgical. He turned pages slowly, the crease between his brows deepening. Marissa leaned in closer, her lips pressing into a thin line as she scrolled through digital copies. "This is extensive," she murmured. "It's also consistent," the director added. "Every timeline lines up with our internal review findings. His slides match your wording, your structure, even your example scenarios." I kept my voice steady. "I didn't confront him. I wasn't sure how far it went, and I didn't want to accuse him without proof." "And the most recent proposal?" the director asked quietly. "The synapse efficiency model." I felt a tiny flicker of heat inside my chest. "That was my draft." They both looked up sharply. "Your draft?" the director repeated. "Yes," I said, keeping my gaze direct. "Except it wasn't a real proposal. It was intentionally unfinished, inconsistent, something I never intended to present. I left it out by accident." I let a faint, calculated pause linger, and the next time I checked, it was gone. Marissa's stylus resumed its tapping, rapid now. "So Michael took it," the director said, more a conclusion than a question. I nodded once. "He must have. No one else had access to my desk after hours." Silence settled again, but this time it was charged, not with fear, but realization. The director sat back slowly. "Emily," You've done exceptional work, and it's clear you've been taken advantage of." Those words landed heavier than I expected. I had known the truth, lived inside it for weeks, but hearing it said aloud by someone in authority felt like a door finally unlocking inside me. Marissa closed her tablet. "Thank you for your honesty. This information is critical." The director folded his hands. "We'll need to follow formal procedure, but I can tell you now, this fundamentally changes the situation." I exhaled, not quite relief yet, but something close. "One more question," he added. "How long has this been happening?" I thought back to those early mornings, those eerie coincidences, those first unsettling moments when I felt someone reaching into my mind. "Months," I said quietly. "Maybe longer." The director nodded solemnly. "Then it's time we set things right." He stood and extended a hand. I shook it, my palm warming against his. "Emily," he said, "I want you to know that this department values integrity. What you've shown, patience, restraint, professionalism, is commendable." My throat tightened unexpectedly. When the meeting ended, I stepped back into the hallway. Everything looked exactly the same. Desks humming, printers buzzing. But something had changed. Not in the office. In me. For the first time since this nightmare began, the weight pressing on my shoulders eased. Michael's theft was no longer a secret I carried alone. Now it was a truth the company would have to face. The next 48 hours felt like watching a building collapse in slow motion. Quiet at first, then impossible to look away from. HR moved methodically, interviewing more team members, requesting submission histories, pulling email logs and archived drafts. No one spoke openly about the investigation, but the atmosphere was thick with it. Every whispered conversation, every glance toward Michael's office carried the same unspoken question. What happens next? For once, I didn't dread the answer. Michael tried to maintain normalcy. He walked quickly, spoke firmly, pretended nothing was wrong. But the cracks were visible. His smile was too tight. His hand shook slightly when he typed. He jumped whenever someone from HR appeared in the hallway. He knew. Maybe not the full extent, but enough to feel the walls closing in. By Thursday morning, the director sent out a short-clipped announcement. "There will be a team-wide meeting at 3 p.m. today. Attendance is required." Required. Meetings were rarely required. People traded looks over their monitors, whispers crackling like static in the air. I forced myself to keep working, though my heart buzzed with anticipation. Whatever happened at 3 p.m. would mark the end of something, maybe the end of all of this. At 2:58, the room filled. Everyone took their seats. Michael sat near the front, stiff and pale, but trying desperately to appear composed. He glanced at me once, and in that glance I saw something fragile, like a man clinging to a fraying rope. The director entered with Marissa from HR at his side. He didn't sit. He cleared his throat and looked around the room with the seriousness of someone about to deliver a verdict. "Thank you for being here," he began. "Over the past week, we have conducted a thorough internal review of our project development processes after discovering inconsistencies in recent proposals." A hush fell immediately. Even the clicking keyboards had gone quiet. "This review has revealed significant discrepancies in authorship, documentation, and the accuracy of several presentations delivered under Michael Turner's leadership." Michael shifted in his seat, but the director continued without acknowledging him. "I won't go into every detail, but I will say this. Our findings show a pattern of misrepresentation. Several projects attributed to Michael were traced back to other employees' original work. In some cases, those employees never even knew their contributions were being used. A ripple moved through the room. Shock, anger, realization. The director's gaze swept across the team. This behavior not only violates company policy, but undermines the integrity of our entire department. And it ends today. Michael stood abruptly. With all due respect, this is exaggerated. I've guided this team for years. Everything I presented has been verified, the director interrupted sharply, as work developed by others. He gestured toward the folder in his hand, my folder. Every timeline, every draft, every metadata record matches the testimony we received. Michael's breath hitched. He looked at me. Just me. His stare wasn't angry. It was betrayed, as if I had wronged him by revealing the truth he'd been burying under stolen brilliance. You, he whispered, barely audible. I didn't look away. The director resumed. Effective immediately, Michael Turner is removed from his leadership position. HR will coordinate his reassignment pending further administrative review. The room exhaled all at once, a collective release of tension that had been building for months. Michael didn't say another word. He walked out stiffly, shoulders shaking with suppressed outrage, or maybe fear. The door closed behind him with a hollow thud, and just like that, he was gone. The director turned his attention back to the team. This department deserves leadership built on honesty and actual contribution. With that in mind, we are appointing an interim lead to guide the upcoming projects while we finalize restructuring. He paused. His eyes landed on me. Emily will take over the project Michael was overseeing, he said, and she will lead development on our next major initiative. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The room blurred slightly as dozens of eyes turned toward me. My pulse thumped against my ribs. Me, leading the project he once claimed as his. Nora gasped softly. Tim gave a small approving nod. Sally smiled with relief and something like pride. I stood slowly, not trusting my voice but knowing I had to say something. Thank you, I managed. I'll do my best. I know you will, the director said simply. The rest of the meeting passed in a haze, announcements, upcoming tasks, reassurances, but my mind kept circling the same thought. It's over. Finally, over. Afterward, people gathered around my desk, offering congratulations and support. Nora hugged me. Tim clapped my shoulder. Even employees I barely spoke to smiled warmly. You deserve this, Sally said. Honestly, it's about time. When the crowd dispersed, I sat down at my desk and exhaled deeply. A calmness washed over me, slow and warm, like sunlight returning after a storm. For the first time in months, I felt safe at my own workstation. No invisible hands rifling through my ideas, no quiet theft, no shadow hovering over every concept I created. This space, this work, finally belonged to me again. As the day wound down, the director stopped by one last time. Emily, he said, leaning briefly against my cubicle wall, I want you to know, your courage made this possible. Not everyone would have handled things with such restraint. I didn't feel brave, I admitted. That's usually how bravery feels, he replied. Keep doing what you're doing. When he left, I opened a fresh notebook, the pages crisp and clean. For a moment, I only stared at them. Blank space, endless space, untouched by anyone but me. I picked up my pen. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid of what would happen to my ideas. I was finally ready to create again, this time in the open, in the daylight, without someone stealing the light for themselves. The first Monday after the storm felt strangely quiet. Not the awkward, anxious quiet we'd endured during the investigation, but a gentler silence, like the air after heavy rain, when everything feels washed clean. I walked into the office with a calm I hadn't felt in months. No dread, no suspicion, no fear clawing at the back of my mind. Just possibility. People greeted me differently now, not with awe or hesitation, but with genuine warmth. Respect even. A few congratulated me again on the new role. Others simply smiled as I passed, as if acknowledging a shift we'd all needed. Michael's office was dark and empty. HR had already removed his nameplate. Someone had boxed his things. The space looked smaller without his presence, as if the room itself had deflated in relief. I didn't feel triumphant when I saw it like that. Just steady. The truth had done what it needed to do. There was no satisfaction left to take. I reached my desk and set my bag down. The surface was exactly as I'd left it, papers aligned, laptop closed, notebooks stacked neatly. And for the first time, I knew those details were untouched by anyone but me. Freedom could be something as small as that. The director stopped by just before 9. "Ready for your big day?" "Mostly," I said with a small laugh. "Ask me again in an hour. I'm confident you'll make this transition smooth for everyone." "I hope so." He tapped the edge of my cubicle lightly. "Your presentation is at 11. And Emily, make it yours." That sentence warmed me more than I expected. After he left, I opened my notebook. My real notebook. Not a decoy, not a trap, not a weapon disguised as an idea. The first few pages were filled with brainstorming for the project I'd been assigned. Honest thoughts, complex structures, mind maps that made sense only to me. And today, for the first time, I would be the one presenting them. I spent the next 2 hours organizing the slides and reviewing my notes, but strangely, I didn't feel the old pressure. Maybe because I wasn't trying to outrun someone's theft. Maybe because, for the first time, I wasn't working in someone else's shadow. At 10:55, the team began filtering into the meeting room. Nora waved excitedly. Sally gave me a thumbs up. Even people I barely interacted with looked curious, expectant. When I stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted, energized, supportive. Not the suffocating tension that had surrounded Michael's presentations, but something open and ready. I connected my laptop to the projector. My opening slide appeared. Quarterly Innovation Initiative, Preliminary Concepts. Presented by Emily Harper. Seeing my name, on the screen made something flutter in my chest. Pride, maybe, or relief, or both. At exactly 11, the director signaled for us to begin. I took a breath. "Good morning. I've been exploring several new directions for the initiative, and I'd like to walk you through the first conceptual framework." And I did. I spoke in my own voice, steady, thoughtful, unhurried, explaining not just results but reasoning, not just diagrams but their meaning. The room listened, really listened. People nodded, took notes, asked questions, not to catch me off guard, not to expose flaws, but to build on the ideas, collaborate, strengthen. It felt like the work environment I'd always hoped for, but only now finally experienced. At one point, Tim asked, "Could you expand on the second model? The one comparing workflow alignment to energy flow?" I smiled. "Of course. That's one of my favorites." As I walked him through it, I caught the director watching me, not critically, not skeptically, but with something like quiet pride. That almost undid me. I hadn't realized how much I'd carried the weight of invisibility until I finally felt seen. By the time I reached the final slide, the room felt bright. "And that's the initial overview," I concluded. Everything here is open to refinement, and I'm excited to collaborate as the project develops." The director was the first to speak. "Excellent work, Emily." Then Nora. "This is stronger than anything we've seen in months." Then Tim. "Clear, practical, and actually innovative." Then Sally. "Refreshing. Seriously." A warmth spread through me, deep, steady, grounding, not adrenaline, not the sharp satisfaction of revenge. Something better, recognition, respect. Earned, not stolen. After the meeting ended, people lingered to discuss ideas with me. They asked follow-up questions. They offered suggestions. They treated me exactly as a creator should be treated, as someone whose mind mattered. When the room finally emptied, I shut down the projector and gathered my things. I paused for a moment, letting the reality settle in. This was my work, my voice, my moment, and no one could take it from me now. As I stepped back into the hallway, sunlight from the windows stretched across the floor in long, warm lines. The office hummed softly with activity, not tense, not suffocating. Alive. I walked to my desk, opened my notebook again, and let my pen touch the page. New ideas came easily, not out of fear, not in secret, not as something to protect at all costs, but as something I could finally share. I'd won more than an investigation, more than a new title. I'd reclaimed the part of myself that Michael had tried to steal in the dark. And now, standing in the full light of day, I was ready to create without hesitation, ready for everything that came next. A new beginning, one that belonged, unquestionably, to me.